Let me start over again. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and valued participants, welcome to today's edTalk on the art of powerful presentation, where we ace success with presentations. I'm thrilled to see such an enthusiastic turnout for what promises to be an enlightening and transformative session. Before we dwell into heart of our discussion, allow me to introduce our esteemed speaker, Mr. Mohit Chhabra. Mohit is not just a presenter, he's a maestro of communication, a power coach, and a true expert in art of presentation. With over 18 years of experience and having trained over 20,000 professionals across various industries, Mohit brings a wealth of knowledge and practical insights to the table. His interactive coaching approach and emphasis on mastering visual communication have earned him appreciation as one of the most sought after presentation coaches in the industry. Today, Mohit will share his invaluable expertise to help you and your team evaluate and elevate your presentation skills to new heights. From enhancing your delivery techniques to mastering the art of storytelling, Mohit will provide practical tips and strategies that you can immediately apply to your presentations. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming and giving a warm welcome to our presentation maestro, Mohit Chhabra. Mohit, the floor is yours to enlighten and inspire us with your insights on acing success with presentations. Also, we have an amazing opportunity for all of us to win an Amazon gift card by the end of this session. It is for everyone. I hope you all stick around to know more about it towards the end. Once again, welcome back, Mohit.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you so much. I will just give me a second and I'll start sharing my screen. Perfect. Thank you so much for that very kind and undeserving introduction, Ashutosh. Thank you so much. And a very warm welcome to all those who have joined in. I saw a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, and of course, pleasure on LinkedIn. And I'm hoping that I live up to that hype. And I'm going to start at a very unusual place, when it comes to presentations. I'm going to start at a letter that was written in 1635 by a man called Sir Isaac Newton. He wrote it to a man called Robert Hooke, that some of you might remember from your 12th class physics as the man who gave us Hooke's law of elasticity. And there's one particular sentence that shouts out at me from that letter. It says, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." What essentially Sir Isaac Newton meant, that everything that he's achieved has largely been possible because of practitioners that came before him, and he simply developed on the work. So the next 90 minutes that I spend with you, I'm going to borrow from all over the place. I'm going to borrow from psychology. I will borrow from behavioral economics. I will borrow from graphic design. And of course, I will borrow from the science of communication. So let me give you a brief insight into what's in store for the next 90 minutes. I'm definitely going to cover what is wrong with corporate presentations. The reason so many of you are here today is you are also on the receiving end of that error. Then we'll try and understand what is the presentation ecosystem. And it really gives us an insight into what is a presentation, how do we deliver presentations, how is a slide deck different from a presentation, and various such questions that we have a very fuzzy understanding of. And it's in this chapter of my presentation with you that I will also answer the question of what makes an impactful presentation. And then finally, I will spend some time on giving you some practical insights on what are the principles of good design. So there's one big principle that I'm going to cover. And interestingly, that's a principle that you see all around yourself. You will see it in your homes. You will see it in the office where you're sitting. You'll also see it in cafeterias and cinema halls. And once we structure it, you'll realize how easy good slide design is. So that's really the next 90 minutes. Now that all of you know where we're going and how we're going to get there, I'd be happy to hear in the chat window or any questions with regard to what your expectation might be from me and from the next 90 seconds. If there's any particular challenge that's bothering you, I'd love to hear what that challenge is. And at the right time in my conversation with you, I will address those challenges. So go ahead and type in your expectations/challenges in the chat window, and I'll be happy to cover it. My only expectation is that I know this is supposed to be a one-way street, but let's try and make this as much of a conversation as possible. On my right is a screen where I can see all your questions and your chat comments. And of course, there's Ashutosh to help me. He's going to curate all the questions that you type in, and we will ensure we address each one of them. But I'd also urge you to get yourself a paper and pen, because maybe in response to some of the questions/inputs that come in, I might cite a book or an article or a video or podcasts, which are my favorite. And then by the time you come back and ask me again, there's a possibility I could have forgotten what I kind of recommended to you. Great. So Krishnendu says, I've come with an open mind to validate what I don't know. That is the best place to be in, and also puts the most pressure on me, Krishnendu. Dr. Indu says, that went away too fast. Let me quickly read what she says. How do you keep the audience involved and attentive throughout our presentation? So I'm going to try and do that, Dr. Indu, and maybe you could pick up some tips from that. In case you don't, shout back at me at the end, and I'll give you the two big dimensions of engagement. How do you handle impromptu presentations, and how do you capture the audience without data points which are readily available? So which is what Deepa, what we're trying to ask is, how do you wing it? Well, that's a tough one, but I will give you some tips on how to do that. When you have a lot to say, how do you make it crisp? Excellent. Devanita, you could win the 500 rupee voucher that Ashutosh talked to you about if you're able to identify a number that kind of constantly appears during the course of my presentation. So I will come back to you at the end of the presentation and ask you what that number was. If you're able to identify it, I will put all my energies behind you for you to take home that voucher. So keep these coming in, and I will then ensure I address each one of these and more. So let me jump in. Let's get into the first chapter of what I intend to discuss with you. What is wrong with presentations? You know, this is something I'd rather show you than tell you. Look at this slide. And there's a very, very sharp and pointed question I have to ask all of you. How many of you are guilty of making a slide like this? And you can notice that I have made no effort to camouflage who has made this slide. This slide has come from the house of Boeing. Spend a few seconds. I'm going to keep quiet till then and see if you can make any sense out of it. And if you have made slides like this, you could write GAC in the chat window, meaning guilty as charged. Great. So I've got some good expectations. Great. Piyush says guilty as charged. There's at least one honest person. Let me wait for the others to come in. Great. That's 2, 3, and I'm hoping many more will say yes. You know, you'll be shocked to know that this slide is accused of murder. And not the figurative kind, the literal kind. This slide is largely responsible for bringing down the entire Columbia crew, including Kalpana Chawla. And I'm not saying this. This slide makes an appearance on page 191 of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board's report. The report is still available on the NASA website. Now let's take a closer look at what this slide is trying to tell us. Now, there are two things that are massively wrong with this slide. Now, one is at the level at which we communicate, and the other is really at the level of our communication through presentations. So first things, the slide has the word significant and any form thereof 5 times. 5 times. Now, honestly, Significant is like beauty. It lies in the eye of the beholder. Let me give you an example. And I've been battling weight all my life. So 2 flights of stairs is significant exercise for me. But if any one of you is a marathon runner or even an athlete with just mediocre fitness, 2 flights of stairs is a joke. Therefore, it doesn't matter. Yes, Ashia, you have a question. You want to type it in? Let's wait for Ashia to type in. Let's now look at what is wrong with respect to this particular slide design or the way information is structured on the slide. The most important information is buried right at the bottom, right at the bottom. Now, if you analyze this, even with just a basic understanding of mathematics, the margin of error in the experiment versus what was real life is 660x. That's 1920 by 3. 3 is the volume or cubic units that Boeing actually tested. 1920 cubic units was the estimated volume of ramp that was missing from the underbelly of the space shuttle. Anyone in their right mind, if they had looked at that number, would have not allowed re-entry. However, because it was buried right at the bottom, and most of the members of the audience were fatigued by reading through so much information, they lost the key point. And the rest is tragic history. Now, this tragedy is further amplified by the fact that there are almost 350 presentations being delivered every second of every day. Now, let me tell you another startling fact. This data is 13 years old. There's never been a refresh by Microsoft on how many presentations are delivered every second of every day. We've lived through a couple of wars at almost a regional level. We've lived through a pandemic. The sheer volume of presentations, because of many of the events around us, have skyrocketed. And not just that, presentations have become like oxygen. They're everywhere. Everybody's doing it across all different kinds of environments. Students are doing it, politicians are doing it. At conferences, it's almost like a standard expectation that the speaker is going to carry a set of slides. But the reality is that a vast majority of these presentations are boring. And I'm being very kind when I say they're boring. They're actually pathetic. There is a phrase that explains all of this: death by PowerPoint. And it's kind of weird, right? Imagine if I committed a murder with a hammer. It's almost like saying that the hammer must go to jail because it's death by hammer. So we're doing something wrong and we're blaming this beautiful tool for what we're doing wrong. The obvious question we've got to ask ourselves is, why do we endure mediocrity in presentations? We don't endure mediocrity in any other thing. You won't go to a restaurant that serves food that is not all that great. You won't go to a restaurant that serves food or prepares food in an unhygienic condition. You won't buy a shirt even if one of the buttons is off the cuff. But why then, 99% of the times, you're willing to accept a subpar presentation? And what is even more ironic is that all of you have the answer to this question. You've never thought about it in a certain direction. And that's exactly what I'm going to help you do. I want all of you to think about the best presentation and the worst presentation that you've ever seen, the best and the worst. And all I want you to do is write down for me in the chat window, why did you find the one that you found the best? And why did you find the one that you found the worst? So just give me reasons of what you liked in certain presentations and what you hated in the others. And I'm sure each one of you has had exposure to hundreds of presentations that were terrible and a handful of them that were good. So write down your responses. And after I have at least 5-6 responses, I will have enough of a trend to help you analyze what the problem is. Great. Awesome. So Bhavisha says, too many verbos. Hi, Bhavisha. Good to see you here. Let me go back. Some of these are going really fast. I love that. Okay, bullet points, visuals, and I'm assuming, Ashwarya, this is for good presentations. Let me scroll to the top. Vida says, worst has too many colors and too much text. Raja says, I prefer less text. Best presentations that you like had lots of images and stories. Text is red, bold. Best is minimal, visually appealing. Awesome. Did not waste my time. More text, less pictorial representation, relevant visuals, pointed points. So I'm hoping that also means relevant points. Great. Verse was too much data and messy. Isharani, you're saying good story flow. Excellent. This is a survey that we conduct every year. And this is one of the questions among many questions that we ask our respondents. And we cover about 500 people, and we've been doing this for 7 years. And what is interesting is, irrespective of how many years you've been watching presentations, what level you are, the responses are almost a mimic of what you've talked about. Let me show you the summary of those responses. The speaker was reading the slides, the text was too small, catchy, crisp, less slides, visual slides, all of this in some form and fashion you've talked about. But I don't really want to look at the data with this lens. Every presentation, for it to be successful, has 3 pillars, and we know this intuitively. The first one you've talked about is story. The second is slides, and you've talked about that as well. You've talked about too much information, too much text, colors, so on and so forth. And the last is the delivery. Now, what is very interesting, in some of the responses that I read, none of you talked about body language. None of you talked about pronunciation. So let's divide this into the 3 buckets of story, slide design, and speaking. And the skew is already visible. The reasons that make or break a presentation are skewed towards story and slide design. And speaking is virtually minimal. Now let's look at the ones that are common to all the good presentations. Lots of examples, stories, you talked about it. Finished in time. I don't think any one of you wants to sit with me beyond even 2 minutes beyond 5 o'clock, right? There's appropriate humor, clear flow. That's what you talked about. There's a story structure to it, simple and easy to understand. So effectively, if you look closely, there is a common thread that connects all of these. Everything on the top is about preparation. Everything at the bottom is about delivery. So what really makes a great preparation, what really makes a great presentation, is all the preparation that you put in. Lack of preparation is what kills your presentation. And there's another layer kind of buried under all of these responses. You have to remember that your audience is extremely selfish. They don't care about who you are. They don't care how much work you've done. They only care about one thing: what's in it for me. But at the same time, while they're extremely selfish, they're also very forgiving. A fumble here and a stumble there, they don't care. As long as the story, the design is clear and the content is simple and easy to understand. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not death by PowerPoint. It's death by ignorance. We're ignorant of so many things on what makes a great presentation. Some of them I will unravel today. And of course, because of paucity of time, I obviously cannot get into the details of everything. But the most important ones are the ones I'm going to cover. So while I move to the next chapter, is there any question or any other clarification that you seek so far? Any questions or clarification so far? So Karthik, brevity is a great example. And a dimension of brevity is that people expect you to finish in time. Perfect. Since there are no more questions, let me now jump to the whole thing that I prefer to call the presentation ecosystem. The first thing you have to understand is you must have a fair grip to know where are you presenting. Now, interestingly, you have these really, really artificial sort of categorizations of, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. And I'm talking to the finance people, I'm talking to legal. No. Where really is controlled by the environment in which you're presenting. And there are 2 kinds of environments. One is what we call the conference room. So a TED Talk is a conference room environment. uh, the CEO's town hall is a conference room environment. Stark opposite of that is the boardroom environment. Now, please understand, a conference room is more like a shoot and scoop. The presenter comes in, delivers their message, and boom, runs away. And in large number of conference room environments, there is only a limited interaction between the presenter and the audience. Now let's look at the most important conference room environment that we are all kind of enduring these days, the political rally. Even though the political rally is not happening inside of a room, it has all the trappings of a conference room. A boardroom is more like where you do your review presentations and you do your sales pitches and most of the kind of work that many of you are doing on a day-to-day basis. That's why if you notice, the tagline of TED is not ideas worth implementing. It just says ideas worth spreading. So they come and they inform you. And that's really the purpose of a conference room presentation. They come, they tell you, and they go away. How do you make use of that information is really your job. Entertainment, so stand-up comedy or presentations delivered for the sake of entertainment are also in the same category. In the boardroom, though, your objective as a speaker is to persuade, is to convince your audience to buy in to what you're selling them. It could be a solution, it could be a product, it could just be the fact that, I messed up last month, but next month's going to be much better. Therefore, if you look at the way information flows in a boardroom presentation, it is two-way. You will be interrupted. There is almost a need to strike a conversation. However, in a conference room environment, it's a unidirectional flow. So the presenter comes in, delivers, and goes away. Because of the way information flows, while a boardroom is more a conversation, the conference room is almost like a choreographed performance. Where do you pause? How long do you wait for the applause to settle in? All of that is planned. As a matter of fact, TED, the organization that has done more to the world of public speaking than any other university ever, and I'm not saying this, the Economist says this, says that for you to really come up with a decent TED talk should take you a minimum of 6 months. And this begins at the fact that you're already a subject matter expert and figuring out what the title is, what I'm going to include, what I'm going to leave out. As Karthik said, brevity, all of that calls for a huge amount of work. And that's why it's practiced and rehearsed many times. There is another environment, by the way, which is actually the coming together of both of these. And that's what we call the classroom environment. That's where I present the most. So there's a certain element of a boardroom there, which means, there is a conversation that you strike, and I can see some questions that have come in, and I'm really going to answer those. So that's really the conversation piece. But all the slides that I'm taking you through is really what I've prepared for this interaction with you. So there's a certain unidirectional flow, and of course, there's a certain bidirectional flow. Nishit, you raised your hand, sir. Is there a question that I can answer that you can type in? Because audio for you is going to be disabled. We're in a webinar environment and not a conference call. So if you can quickly type in your question, I'll be happy to address that before I move on. I think one of you had also raised a hand a little while ago. Anyway, so if I'm moving on, and Ashutosh will support me and interject whenever, Nishit, we have your question in here. Now let's look at the second dimension of the presentation ecosystem, is how are you delivering your presentation? Now, this is what creates the most confusion in the minds of presentation makers and presentation consumers. I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I want to invoke a different sort of a metaphor. Think of information like food. As a matter of fact, information is like food. You eat to keep your body healthy, but you also eat for pleasure. That's exactly why you consume information. You consume information to keep your mind healthy. And I'm hoping most of you have come here today for consuming information to give some nutrition to your mind. But then you also consume information for pleasure. So, watching Mirzapur and watching Aspirants and any other series that you admire and love is really consuming information for pleasure. Now, how is food cooked? Food is cooked in vessels, but the vessel does not dictate what is the output. It's the input that dictates the output. Let me give you an example. You have a wok at home, a kadhai. It doesn't matter what the kadhai is used for. What matters is what you put in the kadhai. So if you put halwa, if you put suji and sugar, you're likely to get halwa and not upma. So the vessel does not dictate the outcome. The vessel only is used to cook. Software is a vessel for information. Therefore, what you put in a certain software should not be dictated by the software because it's just a vessel. So if you put information inside of a PowerPoint, you don't necessarily get a slide deck. If you put in information inside of a Word, you don't necessarily get a document. It could be different. So let's understand the nature of information artifacts that we produce. If you attach your slide deck, if you attach anything with an email, that by virtue of its nature is called a document. And I'll define this for you in just a bit. When you present something like I am doing, so what you see on your screen is an accompaniment to my talk, to my conversation with you, right? That is called a slide deck. Now, how are they different? Number one, in consumption. If I attach a presentation or a document or my resume or a contract and I send that to you, your consumption of that particular information artifact is self-guided. I am not there to help you, consume what I want you to consume. So for instance, I'll give you a small example. Magazine. Magazine is also a kind of document. I've grown up reading the India Today. One of the most interesting pieces in an edition of India Today was the last page. I think it was called India Notes or something. And it had these quirky stories at the end. And that's where I started reading the magazine. And I realized most people do that, right? Newspaper, perfect example of a document. Most people who are preparing for exams like the UPSC start not on the front page, but on the editorial page. So the author cannot dictate how and from where the reader will begin. Whereas in a presentation, I am controlling what you're seeing. If I click back, the point disappears. If I click forward, the point comes in. So your consumption of this information artifact is guided by me. Therefore, you have to understand how information is laid out on these artifacts. The information in a document is exhaustive because the document has to stand on its feet. A contract is a beautiful example of a document. Usually contracts are drafted by one party. They're executed by two different parties. And many times when the contract is invoked or enforced, the person who drafted the contract and the signatories may not even be in the picture. But the contract is still enforceable. And the lawyers who are actually fighting it out in the court, don't go looking for the guy who drafted it because it's self-sufficient. My slide deck should be crippled without me. So when you look at this slide, you're like, what the hell is he trying to say? And that is exactly the hallmark of a great presentation. And interestingly, I'm not saying this. You said this. Too much information, written content only. The slides have to be crisp. That's exactly what cripples them without me. So slides are visual artifacts. They're not meant to be full of text. And you've all committed to this a little while ago. Therefore, the design of a document is visually dense. It's got lots of text. And the design of a slide is visually sparse. Lots of white space. Let me show you an example. This is a couple of pages from a document which is actually explaining the metaphor that I just spoke about. Information is like food. If I were to convert these 2 pages into a slide, this is what it looked like. And you're like, Mohit, where has everything gone? That's exactly what I will tell you. Let me show you another example. This is a page from a workbook. where we've extracted from a booklet called Really Bad PowerPoint by Seth Godin. The accompanying slide of this page looks something like this. The text is large, the text is readable. There's a certain sense of design unity because the picture that's been used is the same. And interestingly, there are some very important pieces of information I've left out. What is the name of the book? That's what I'm going to tell people. And then I ask people, do you know any book named by Seth Godin? Anybody who answers gets an Amazon voucher. That's a great way for me to create engagement. So as a presenter, you have to hide some information from your slides so you can create a sense of engagement. And I love the question that you asked me, that how do you create engagement on a slide? We'll just see that in a presentation. We'll just see that in a bit. So we've answered 2 questions about the ecosystem. Where are we presenting and how are we presenting? And for the third one, I really like your responses. What, according to you, is a presentation? Can you type that for me in the chat window? Let me see what are some of the interesting responses we get in terms of what do you think is a presentation? Okay, let me read. Viva says, what background to be used for slides, dark theme or light theme? That's a brilliant question, Viva. I will answer it when I do slide design in just a bit. Vijeta says, how do you balance the amount of information to ensure clarity, but at the same time not too overwhelming? So I think, Vijeta, you've partly been able to answer this question for yourself. Minimal text on the slide, more narration. And I think that's why you're here, Vijeta, today. I don't think you're here to read my slides. You're here more to listen to what I have to say. And that's exactly the expectation of your audience as well. So just write as much text on a slide which becomes meaningful as long as they read it in conjunction to what you've said, right? Let's look at so Bhavisha says, being a trainer, a presentation is a mode to spread information that needs to be passed to the audience. Yeah, but a document is also a way of spreading information, right? A video is also a way of spreading information. Short and simple visual representation of a large amount of data. Okay. Share something in the most convincing manner, simple with creativity. These are all amazing responses, and I'm not saying any one of them is wrong. They're all absolutely right, but they're at a very high level of abstraction. They're extremely abstract, So, for instance, simple with creativity. A suit, ladies' suit, could be simple with creativity. A painting could be simple with creativity. A home could be designed in a simple manner and yet be creative. A car could be simple and be creative, and I can go on and on and on. So it doesn't really, so abstract that I can virtually fit it to anything. A presentation is an opportunity to come across as an expert. Now, Vidya, just a little while ago, you actually said, and I was actually noting that down, you said that a good presentation is one where the person does not come across as an expert. And a few seconds later, you say a presentation is an opportunity where the person comes across as an expert. All right. It's an exciting journey for the audience. Yeah. So is an Indiana Jones movie, Karthik. So in some form and fashion, they call it a presentation as well. Conveys my message clearly and crisply. By the way, we're looking at presentation from a very narrow lens of corporate presentations, but I was thinking more about the word presentation. A fashion designer showcase of his ensemble is also often referred to as a presentation. While there is a constrained channel between you and me, but I think you will acknowledge the fact that for the last 35 minutes or so, I've been trying to engage in a conversation with you, right? My channel of communication with you is more oral, where you're kind of giving me a back channel through the written word. And these are questions that you're firing at me, and these are comments that you're giving me. So, in a nutshell, a presentation is a bunch of conversations that the presenter is having with the audience. But hang on, there's the element of slides in it. So there's video that's expected, and there is charts, and there are visuals, and there's text. In one word, it's multimedia. So a presentation is a multimedia enabled dialogue. It's a dialogue that you have with people. And I can assure you, if I were to ask you one expectation that you have not cited or explicitly said to me at the beginning, was that let this presentation not be a one-way street. I want to interact. I want to share my opinion. I want to ask questions. You want it to be a dialogue. And guess what? Most presentations that we deliver are either delivered to customers as sales pitches, to investors as product and money pitches, and of course to your managers as review presentations. And you can't ask your audience set to say, don't ask me questions. They will interrupt you. They will interject. They will want to interact with you. So think of a presentation as a multimedia enabled dialogue, which means that when Ashutosh said, Mohit, you have 90 minutes for the edTalk, those 90 minutes don't belong to me. They belong to us, which means there's a certain time that I dedicate to you to asking me the right questions, to interact, and even to give me your opinions. However, there are three simple ways, or rather three reasons we present. One is we present to inform. So I've been presenting to inform. But if I were making a sales pitch, as one of you said, that as a trainer presents to persuade. That's called non-sales selling, right? A teacher is a non-sales salesperson. When you go to your boss and say, I'm up for a promotion, you are persuading your boss in a non-sales environment. You're persuading him or her to promote you and not necessarily write you a check at that particular moment in time. And interestingly, the third one is the one that we don't do at all, and which, by the way, is also the toughest: presenting to entertain. So we should actually thank our stars that we only present to inform and we present to persuade. And I'm really curious to read some of the inputs that have come on what is a presentation. Shriyanka, are we going to cover storytelling in a presentation? Not today, Shriyanka. We don't have enough time. We're only going to cover three things. I am on the second chapter right now. Isha says, one thing I feel during a presentation that addressing the why I'm presenting it, how is important to really engage the audience. Absolutely. So Isha, you've really given me what should go inside a presentation. But my larger question was, what is a presentation? So you could define that as a multimedia enabled dialogue, which answers the what, the why, the how, and maybe the what next, or what next and how in whatever sequence you want to talk about. It's a way of telling a story and influencing your. Yes, Seema, so that's absolutely right. But when you tell a story, the story has to be two-way. I don't know if any one of you have seen Black Mirror. Black Mirror, one episode of Black Mirror was the most successful, where you could actually interact with Netflix and you could influence the ending of the episode. Now, it was something very new to the non-reading generation, but I can assure you that as a reader, I've experienced this for the first time in a book by a gentleman called Jeffrey Archer. It's a beautiful book of short stories called Quiver Full of Arrows. And there's one particular story in which the author is interacting with the reader. And they say there are four possible endings of the story. Read them in any sequence that you want. You could even skip 3 of the 4 or skip 2 of the 4. However, I would recommend that you read them in the sequence that I've written them. So interactivity is an expectation that was also built in when there was just the printed word. Vidya said the worst part. Okay, I'm sorry. I misread that, Vidya. My apologies. So now coming to answer the biggest question. What makes a presentation impactful? Now, this is the biggest tragedy of the presentation ecoverse. We've known the answer to this question for 2,500 years. 2,500 years. And the man who gave us this answer was this man called Aristotle. 2,500 years ago, Aristotle said, and what is very interesting, and the reason I want to point that out, yes, Nishit, Jeffrey Archer, and the name of the book was A Quiver, I think Quiver Full of Arrows or A Quiver of Arrows. You just search Quiver and Jeffrey Archer and you get the book. Brilliant book. Short stories. So worked really well even for the non-reader. Hi, Kanishri, good to see you here. Okay. Oh, you read it, Nishit? Excellent. So, what's interesting is that, we're living in a time where actually effective public speaking was discovered. So, Aristotle lived at a time where democracy was starting to take roots in the Roman Empire. And he figured that good public speakers can sway audiences. And effectively, democracy is based on public speaking. Today, you are basing your opinion on leaders and politicians. It's not appropriate to call them leaders. You're basing your opinion about politicians on how they speak in public. I don't think we've met anyone who we vote for. And even if we have, those are chance meetings. You can't really call them people they're more like an acquaintance. So you base your judgment on who you would vote for only on their ability to speak well in public. And this insight dawned to Aristotle, and he really became the first student of public speaking. It used to be called rhetoric at that time. And interestingly, the book that Aristotle wrote was just a summary of his notes. They were never meant to be published. They were published after his death. And the book is called Rhetoric, which is also the art of public speaking. So 2,500 years ago, it dawned on him that effective public speakers bring in three things. The first that of these three things is logos. So you've got to make logical sense of what you're speaking. And you've talked about it in some form and fashion. The second is ethos. Why should you listen to me? And Ashutosh tried to do that. He said, Mohit brings in rich experience and he's done so much, he's trained so many people. He's just trying to build credibility in your mind about me. Now remember, credibility is not something I carry. Credibility is something that resides in your mind about me. And interestingly, in the last 2,500 years, credibility has kind of gotten split up into two things. So credibility today is made up of two things. First is your competence. So everything hard is competence. The second is your character. Everything soft is character. And that's exactly what Vidya said. When I'm talking to an expert, I shouldn't feel like I'm talking to an expert. It should be more like a conversation that the person's having with me. So which is that soft dimension of your expertise. So credibility is what Aristotle termed as ethos. The third of this was pathos, emotional appeal. And Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, postulated that it's at the cusp of these three lies a persuasive speech. Now, I don't want you to believe me or take my word for it. I want you to see a demonstration of this. I want you to see this in action. This is one of my favorite speeches. This is the Oscar acceptance speech by a gentleman called Matthew McConaughey. And while you watch this, I want you to identify the three things that Aristotle pointed out 2,500 years ago. Ethos, pathos, logos. Now, interestingly, this guy is winning the Oscar award, so he is credible. He's got a certain credibility associated, but you'll still see character shine out. So look for that softer dimension of his character. So look for character, look for logos, which is how he has structured his talk. And last but not the least, spot pathos. And as you spot it, keep typing it in the chat window. And I love the fact that some of them have already seen it or watch this again. But this time around, watch it with an eye of a scientist and observe for the things that I'm asking you to look out for. Just give me a thumbs up if the audio is loud and clear. Yes, Tanu, I'm just answering that in the next few seconds, right? So let's go back and dissect this. I don't think we even need to talk about pathos, right? There's a huge amount of pathos. You can sense respect and you can sense love and admiration. And there's also a certain joy despite the fact that his father is deceased. So there's a huge amount of pathos. Then, of course, there was credibility. We talked about it. But let me tell you the dimension of credibility that Matthew McConaughey displayed that no other, at least in my knowledge, Oscar recipient has. He came on stage and acknowledged all the other competitors. It's almost like saying, All those who competed against me were equally deserving, but today happens to be my day. One of my favorite singers is Billy Joel. When he won the Grammy, he did the exact opposite. He said, I was the only deserving one. All the others are idiots. And it's kind of corrupted Billy Joel's songs for me. So there is the fact that he's a great actor, but he's also a very decent human being. And he's displayed that. And then Logos, brilliant Logos, right? He actually breaks down his speech into three parts. He talks about God, then he talks about his family, and within his family, he bifurcates them very neatly into deceased and living, and then he talks about himself. So it's almost like big to the small, macro to the micro. Now imagine for a moment, he'd flipped it. Where he talked about himself first, and then he talked about his family, and then last he talked about his dead father when he was talking about family, and then finally he talked about God. We wouldn't be playing this here. Because then we'd say, this man is so full of himself. So that is a dimension of logic. Not just know what to say, but how to say it as well, in what sequence to say it. And interestingly, as Tanu wanted to know, nothing has changed in 25 years. We've only repackaged old wine in new bottle. Logos is now called story, structure, flow. These are exactly the words that you use when you talked about great presentations. Ethos is design. Your presentations reach your audience before even they hear you say the first word. And pathos is delivery. You don't have a background score and you don't have dancers in the background. The only way you communicate emotion is how you intonate with your voice. And it's at the cusp of these three is when you get an impactful presentation. And that is what makes presentation so confusing. And that's why you say, oh, presentations is an art. No, it's not an art, ladies and gentlemen. It is a multidisciplinary skill. You've got to understand how story works, how structure works. Sometimes you don't need a story. You've got to know all of that. Then you've got to know design, which is an entirely different skill. And then finally, you've got to stand there and speak with conviction and confidence. And it takes a little bit of effort to master story, design, and delivery, and then to marry them together. So before I move on to the third and final chapter, any questions so far? Yeah, I think you've got. So Tanu, I hope it answers the question that you had. Give me a thumbs up if it does, or a Y in the chat window. Both work. Nishit and one of you have raised your hands. I don't think you can ask me a question. Oh yes, marrying the three is very difficult. But it's not impossible. It is difficult. You see, you have so many amazing presenters. It's just breaking the problem into small parts and addressing those parts one at a time. And that's why I'm going to give you some really practical tips on the third piece, which is the design piece. And interestingly, to learn design, we will actually again go back to the Oscars. I want you to watch this clip and I'll show you why this happened, not because Warren Beatty was trying to be smart or the PwC gentleman swapped the envelopes. And my apologies to anyone who's from PwC or have relatives working there. It was also a consequence of, I think, the most pathetic sample of design that we've ever seen. Watch this.
It's a privilege for us to present the final award of the evening. The films we honor tonight inspired us, touched our emotions, gave us hope and joy, and may even have changed our thinking.
So, Faye,
Yeah.
let's get to the movies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here are the nominees for Best Picture.
And the Academy Award for Best Picture
You're impossible. Come on. La La Land.
La La Land has 14 Oscar nominations this year and is tied for the most nominated movie in Oscar history.
We lost, by the way, but, you know.
Guys, I'm sorry. No, there's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Moonlight won. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
So we're going to come back to this. So this is one of the worst debates. The only person who was laughing and who had been in a similar situation was Steve Harvey, who did a similar blunder at one of the Miss Universe pageants just a few years before this happened. So this is the envelope that our friend saw, and this is the envelope that Faye Dunaway read from. So we used this to recreate what was actually in the envelope that Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty saw. Now, obviously, Warren Beatty, you saw, did not announce the Oscar award. He was looking inside the envelope, looking behind stage, trying to figure out what happened. But let me try and dissect this, all right? How doped do you have to be standing on the Oscar stage and then have to be told that you're at the Oscar Awards? The largest design element on the card is Oscars. I mean, I'd really want to know what the designer thought these guys were smoking. And then came the name of the winner and what the winner won. So Emma Stone won for La La Land, and the whole problem is kind of amplified with La La Land being in inverted quotes and Best Actress right at the bottom. Now, obviously, Faye Dunaway thought Warren Beatty was fooling around. She saw Emma Stone, didn't make sense. We're announcing the best movie. La La Land in inverted quote, man, that's got to be the answer. And then we know what happened. Now we just do a little bit of a design change. Even if you're totally zoned out, there's no way in heaven you're going to read La La Land when you know this is Emma Stone's card. We've just given the award to Emma Stone a little while ago. Get me the right card. And therefore, it's not a coincidence that, way back in 1976, Thomas Watson Jr. said, good design is good business. But most of us have not woken up to what design even is. If I were to ask you design, most of you would refer to it as visual appeal, all right? However, my favorite actress at one point in time happened also to be my son's favorite actress, Katrina Kaif. You can't go and tell Katrina Kaif you're well designed, even though she's visually very appealing. So we've got the definition of design wrong. Interior design is a perfect example of good design. When you walk into a home that's been designed by an architect or an interior decorator, you know for a fact that it's visually, compelling. But they've also utilized the space so beautifully. And that exactly is the definition of good design. It is a marriage of utility and beauty. And I'm using this word with a lot of caution. All of us who make slides are information designers. So for us, utility is greater than beauty. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, design is not how it looks. Design is how it works. And I'm going to take you through what we call the big four, which are four small principles that are kind of intertwined with one another that make amazing design. So the first of these is called contrast. I will define each one for you. Then I'll conceptually show you how it works. And then I'll show you at least a couple of examples of applying contrast to slides. And then, of course, we'll have some time after that for me to address any questions that you have. There's Vibha's question that is pending, and I will answer that in just a bit. So what is contrast? Contrast is you use certain differences to catch people's attention. Now, if I ask you what this is, most of you say, this is a grid of squares. Brilliant, that is the right answer. But then I say, what do you notice here? And you say, triangle. Why? You notice that one isolated triangle from the 15 other squares because it's different in shape. Now, you can create that difference across a variety of techniques. You could do it with color, you could do it with orientation, you could do it with size. Now, interestingly, these are called pre-attentive attributes. What that means is that your brain is hardwired to notice these differences. I don't have to tell you to focus on the red square. You are actually looking at the red square. How do you incorporate this when it comes to slide? Now, this is a slide. We know intuitively that the numbers are the most important piece of information on the slide. So you kind of make them bold. Brilliant. You've kind of introduced one layer of contrast, which is shape. The shape of the letter is different from the shape of the surrounding letters. Then people who are a little more sensitive to design, add another layer. Color. Brilliant. But for design, for contrast to really catch your eye, you must have 3 layers of contrast. And I've also inserted the third, size. Now you're reading 0.4 by 1000, 0.33 by 1000, and then you're reading peak infection rate. So I'm really controlling through contrast how your eye is moving across. And I like the word that Karthik uses because that's exactly the word I use. How are you using that through the real estate? Now, this I find inconsistent because you either have 2 places of decimal across all the numbers or 1 place of decimal across all the numbers. So that's a choice you make depending on how much accuracy you want in your discussion. However, here, as Karthik pointed out, we have ample real estate to amplify the text that we want. In a table, that's not possible. So what do? You suppress the others. So the one thing that I want you to read is NAS cooperation and contracting. That's exactly what you're reading. Now, the reason I blacked out my slide is I want you to tell me what was the name of the last company in the table, the name of the company in the last row of the table. There you go. Khatija says, did not notice. Ashwarya says, Wanley Parson. That is absolutely right. So, a huge round of applause to those who noticed. But a vast majority of you would not notice. Why? Because contrast creates a focal point on the slide. It's almost like a spotlight that you're shining on that piece of information. And a vast majority of your audience will only focus on that pertinent piece of information. So, contrast the most important information on your slide. Everything else is just context. Then the second of the big 4 is what we call repetition. Now, what's repetition? You repeat visual elements to create a sense of consistency. So what do you mean by visual elements? Colors are visual elements. Fonts are visual elements. The spacing between different elements on a slide is a visual element. Types of images, all of them are visual elements. Information, a repetition of information leads to boredom, leads to lack of engagement, right? Theme and color, absolutely. So don't just repeat it on a slide, repeat it across slides. Now that creates a sense of unity, that creates a sense of recognition. Now, one of the most pertinent examples of repetition is the Coca-Cola logo. More people in this world can read Coca-Cola than there are literate people, which means there's a certain set of illiterate people because of sheer repetition of the way Coca-Cola is written for over 100 years can now read Coca-Cola, but they can't read their name. So let's see how this works and enables us to make visual slides. Now you've got a bullet list, sharp bullets, something that should be avoided. This slide and this slide is exactly the same, right? You've got repetition, the boxes are the same size. You've got repetition for text, the text is exactly the same size. You've also got repetition in terms of the icons. Icons are the same size, they're all the same styling. And then you add a layer of contrast. And then you add it again, and you add it again, and you add it again. And now you know my story is moving on. And here I've come to the end of my story. Contrast, when coupled with repetition, creates a huge impact. And you can do that for writing your slides as well. One of you asked me this question of how do I ensure that the text is limited. So number one, don't ever write full sentences on a slide. Now let's rework another slide. There's a lot of space at the top that seems to have been wasted. So we kind of reconstructed this to look something like this. right? The blacked out word is just the name of the client. So you've got 4. Now I see a certain repetition that's there, but there's a certain amount of repetition that's missing. The first title has 3 lines, the second has 2 lines, the third has 2 lines, and the fourth also has just 1 line. Can I kind of create what I call a parallel structure? Now, what's a parallel structure? First one starts with a verb, That's not really a verb. There's no verb there. It's a noun. So when I write a parallel structure, all the first words of my titles will be verbs. And I've clearly, using contrast, created a segmentation of the title and the subtitle. And all my titles are now in 2 lines. So visually, I've got blocks of 2 lines each. And of course, from a language standpoint, they're all verbs. Create, garner, strengthen, build. And messaging also becomes clear. So repetition allows your audience to understand that what you've created is not a copy-paste job. You've actually exerted effort to create what they see on the screen. Then let's look at the third of these 4 elements, alignment. Now, if you think hard, think of one physical object that is natural and that's perfectly straight. And ironically, there is none. There is nothing in nature that's perfectly straight. Therefore, alignment is a human construct. And you must follow that on slides as well. So what does that mean? You place elements on a slide deliberately to enhance the clarity of the content on the slide. Now, let me give you an example. Okay, so I'll just take a pause where Rujita said, what tools can we use to add these elements easily to our presentations? So Rujita, do you mean where do I get the icons and the images and the infographics from? Is that the question? Okay, so there are some awesome sources available. If time permits us, I will show you those sources as well. And interestingly, I'm as much an Indian as you are, and we love free sources and free stuff, and all of it can be easily accessed for free without any royalty issues as well. Okay, but Rubika, for that, you have to answer this question for me. You obviously see a bunch of random rectangles on your screen. How many groups do you see now? How many groups do you see now? 4. What holds you back by saying 5? Can't you see 5 rows? Why did you say 5 groups? Why did you read the vertical lines and not the horizontal lines? And a vast majority of you say 4. Chunking, so that's like kind of technical, but they're uneven. No, they're as uneven as this. And there's a reason, which is actually the 4th of our 4 rules. And I'll answer that as well. Space ignition, absolutely, except we call it proximity. So this is a perfect example of lack of alignment. There are 2 logos on the slide, which are an overkill. You don't need 2 logos. The headline is not centered. Half the logos on top, half the logos at the bottom. There's this one perfect rectangle. There are rounded rectangles. I mean, this is a mess. This slide and this slide are exactly the same. There's not a reduction in a single full stop, comma, letter here or there. Exactly the same. All we've done is we've added repetition, we've added contrast, and of course, we've added alignment. So it's aligned to the left and it's aligned to the right. Now, interestingly, you've been taught alignment from class 2, except we called it margins. You've got a margin on the top and you've got a margin at the bottom as well. But we also have relative alignment. The height of the first box is equal to the height of the second box, and therefore the boxes are aligned to the right as well. It's all right if there's a little bit of empty space. We've got to get comfortable with empty space. And last but not the least, there is what is called middle alignment. The logos are as much above the line as they are below it. Your eyes expect alignment even when it is not essential. All right. So we've got these 2 charts. Their axes don't necessarily need to be aligned because the chart on the left and the chart on the right are indicating different things. The one on the left is really talking about numbers. The one on the right is talking about proportions, but your eyes glide across the x-axis. And you see a certain, there's a little bit of this jiggling happening. I don't like this. And there's also information repetition, which we call redundancy. So October 2019 and October 2019 are repeating. So we'll take it as the subtitle. Becomes much better. The titles, the x-axis are aligned. And then we also align the legend. And now feels much better. So what does alignment do? Alignment improves the composition. Now, if you ask most people, what is good design, they will also, on a little bit of probing and poking, will say, design is layout. Layout is the common word for composition. Composition of a floor or a slide is how you lay things out on a slide or a piece of paper or a page. When you compose your elements well, it reduces clutter. Therefore, if you have only 5 minutes to clean up a slide, just align it. Align the things that need to be aligned to the left, align them to the right, relatively align them middle. And interestingly, most of it can be done in PowerPoint in an automatic fashion. The last of the big four is also the reason why most of you overwhelmingly answered 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 is proximity. Your brain tells you that objects that are close to one another are related to one another. That, by the way, proximity is also a pre-attentive attribute. Now, coming back to what we answered, your brain will not allow you to see the diagram on the screen as a bunch of 7 columns. You're seeing this as 4 rows of dots. Now, when I flip it over, your brain does not allow you to see these as 7 rows. You're seeing 4 columns. And if I flip it over, the same result happens. So your brain is hardwired to identify proximity. Things that are close to one another are related to one another. Now let's look at this. Now, the moment you see this, your instant reaction when you look at this slide is that storytelling foundation and the first block are related. The second circle and the second block are related. The third circle and the third block, which is not the case. It's really the top 3 elements are related to one another and the bottom 3 elements are related to one another. There's no vertical relationship. So a much better depiction of this slide is something like this. And there's repetition, there's alignment, there's proximity, there's contrast. And interestingly, the space in the middle has a very unpalatable name. That's what creates that sense of proximity. This space in the middle is called a gutter. So use gutters to your advantage because it creates absolutely rujuta. I'm so glad you know that word, right? Gestalt is a dimension of psychology, not many. As a matter of fact, when we do a more detailed version of our workshop, we cover everything with respect to Gestalt. So we break that up into, how similarity and proximity and relationship and enclosure, how there's a certain degree that moves from similarity to enclosure and why boxes, therefore, should be used in the most minimal fashion. That's a brilliant insight. So what does proximity tell us? Proximity helps us improve the understanding of relationships when it comes to objects on a slide. So these are the big 4 principles. There's contrast, there's repetition, there's alignment, there's proximity. Now, if you pause for a moment and see around you, if you're sitting in an office, you're sitting in maybe a coffee shop, you will see all of these at work. Your clothes that you wear, there's contrast, there's repetition, right? And uniform is nothing but a synonym for repetition. By the way, uniform doesn't mean what we thought it meant in school. There's no word that says uniform's a dress. Uniform, you've got to look similar. That's repetition. But I'm a trainer and trainers can be really cheesy at times. So I'm going to really pick up the first letter of each of these and give you an acronym that you can remember. So if you don't crap your slides look like crap. Contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. Now, if you've got these 4 principles in order, just with a little bit of PowerPoint here and there, you can get slides that look brilliant. So just to conclude what I've said, and then I'm going to answer the questions. So we've used a little bit of light to create repetition and contrast. Nishit, that's a very good insight. So to conclude, what are some of the takeaways I'd like you to carry with you? What's wrong with presentations? We are looking in the wrong direction. And we are blaming the tool, PowerPoint. And I love PowerPoint as a tool. It is such a brilliant tool. It is anything that you saw me use over the last 90 minutes or so has been done entirely in a software that's not even 40% of PowerPoint. But of course, I use PowerPoint as well. So we're looking in the wrong direction, right? The manufacturing world has something called GMP, good manufacturing practices. I think we need GPP. We need good presentation practices. And there is no standard rule for good presentation practices. And as a consequence, we are looking at the wrong examples to learn presentations. And I can assure you, many of you learned presentations from your managers, your teachers, your bosses, people you looked up to. And they were not necessarily doing or applying these principles right. So it's not death by PowerPoint. It's death by ignorance. We're ignorant of so many things. And I only covered a handful of ignorance. Gestalt principles are an amazing subject to work with because they help us understand how people process information. And honestly, today, you may have come here, actually, you may have not. You have come here to learn about presentations. You don't care about Mohit. Honestly, if there was a dog in my place who knew as much as I did, you would still be listening with the same intent. So Gestalt principles help us understand how people consume and process information, and that allows us to create engagement. What is the presentation ecosystem? One other bad practice that we are following is we are using slide decks or presentations as documents. No, they're different. A document has a different soul, a slide deck has a different soul. And the moment you use one for another, pardon my Punjabi, you're actually bastardizing both of them. And as a consequence, you fail at creating a decent consumable document and also a decent enough slide. And what are the principles of slide design? I think I don't really need to go into that. You don't crap your slides will look like crap. I'd love to continue this conversation with you. And of course, I'm going to answer some of the questions that have been left unanswered. But this is where you can spot me and catch me. One of my life's mission is to create 50,000 good public speakers. If I can assist you in that form, it will be lovely. So I'm first going to answer the couple of questions that have been on the Q&A panel. And I'd love to hear more, because then at the end, I have a question for all of you. And somebody who gets closest to it, and Tanushree and Bhavisha do not qualify for it because they partially know the answer. And of course, all the other people who I know personally and who've registered. But for all those who are kind of meeting me for the first time, you are all eligible to answer. So let me answer the two questions. The first one was by Vibha. What background to be used for the slides, dark theme or light theme? Is there any relation to where we are presenting? That's a brilliant question. And that has a very simple answer. Please marry the color of the background to the lighting in the room. Okay. If you are presenting in a brightly lit room, which is where most boardroom presentations happen, the color of the slide, the background color of the slide should be a white color, a light color, as light as possible. Right. So I don't know if you noticed or not, most of my slides were light because I'm assuming you're all sitting in a room that has a window and that has large lights. So that's number one. If you are presenting in a theater for a conference room presentation, usually the theater is dark, the lights are dimmed, then a dark background works really well, because otherwise what happens, your big slide in the conference room will serve like a huge light that will almost blind people out. So black background for a dark room and a white background for a light room. Vibha, does that answer the question? Perfect. So I'm going to dismiss that. The second question was partially answered, partially left unanswered. How do you balance the amount of information to ensure clarity, but at the same time not too overwhelming? So don't write anything that, okay. So actually the answer to your question lies in the question that I initially asked all of you. Did you notice a common number across my presentation? One number that came across many times over. Absolutely, Claire. And I think you definitely deserve. So Claire, Ashutosh is the person who deserves the Amazon gift coupon. All right, Claire, if you had not answered, I would have gotten that, but you deserve it much more than I do. Exactly. Claire, you've taken all of this down. That's the power of notes. Ethos, pathos, logos. But forget what you saw in the presentation. I came, I saw, I conquered. 3 wickets for a hat trick. 3 wishes that Aladdin got. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the golden rule of communication. It doesn't matter whether you're writing an email or you're delivering a sales pitch or you're delivering a presentation. Keep it to no more than 3 points. And that's why, World War III said, if it happens once, it is an event. It happens twice, it's a coincidence. If it happens thrice, enemies at work. And beyond that, it's just information dump. So how do you make your slides crisp? You have 1 point on a slide and no more than 3 supporting arguments. In case you want to know why the rule of 3 works really well, again, my old age is catching up on me. The man who gave us spin selling, I forget his name. He's written a beautiful research paper on the power of 3, especially in negotiations. And those principles apply to presentations as well. Perfect. Since there are no more questions, and I really want to end a few minutes before time, and I'm going to, Ashutosh, you'll have to allow me to share my screen for a couple of moments. Now, this is a question I have for all of you.
Sure. Please take the control back.
I started to speak at about 3:35, and the time by my watch, if you can see in my panel, is about 4:51. So I've spoken for about 85 minutes. How many slides, ladies and gentlemen, do you think I've used? Rajvi says 10, 12, 50, many is not right. Kumar says 150. Amit Prabhu says 100. So these are some of the people who know me. You've gotten the number fairly close. I don't know if you can see this, but the number here is 124. I've used 124 slides in the last 85 minutes or so. And that's the power of story. Story is really sequencing information in the right manner. Now imagine if I gave you this information at 3:31, that welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my session. I only have 124 slides. Most of you would have dropped out, and those who would have stayed for 10 minutes would have in all probability issued death threats on the chat window. So sequencing is what makes a great story. And number of slides is the most incorrect boundary condition we have for a successful presentation. A successful presentation is one that keeps the audience engaged, and that happens through 2 methods. And I said I'm going to answer that. One is that the content that you deliver has to be engaging and useful. So if you find content useful, you will continue to stay. Second, it's got to be interactive. And I hope I achieved both. And second is the boundary condition of an effective presentation is that finishes just a little before time. So I know our wrap-up time is 5 o'clock, but I'll try and wrap it up in the next couple of minutes by answering the one question that has come. What is your take on slides, on preparing slides manually in the age of using Gen AI tools that can create? So Karthik, it's a very simple take. Gen AI slides are more like Maggi noodles. They're pre-packaged. Whether you make it or I make it or the roadside guy makes it, they all taste the same and they utterly lack nutrition. Whereas a slide that I have toiled to ensure it meets the needs of the audience, I've brought in my particular flavor to it, is more like a home-cooked meal that's nutritious, it's tasty, and leaves you craving for more. So I hope that answers the question. And of course, now the floor is, Ashutosh, the floor is all yours. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer them. Else, we'll wrap up. Oh, yes, Kumar. So there are 3 websites that you could go to. There's a website called freepick.com. There's a website called flaticon.com. And there's a website called storyset.com. These are amazing tools. Everything that I use comes from these 3 websites. They have a large amount of free resources. Of course, I try and pay for all the images because some of our presentations are in the public domain, but they're all royalty free. Freepik, FREEPIK, storyset.com, and flaticon.com. Perfect. Ashutosh, all yours. I just typed them, Ranjana, in the chat window.
Thank you, Mohit. I would just take a minute. Um, as we draw near to the conclusion of today's talk, I would like to thank, first and foremost, our esteemed speaker. A big thank you, Mohit. Your passion and presentation, coupled with the wealth of knowledge and expertise, has truly enlightened and inspired us all. Your insights have not only transformed our understanding of presentations, but as we can all see, they have empowered us to strive for excellence in our communication skills. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to each and every one of our participants. Your active engagement and thoughtful contributions have made today's session incredibly enriching and rewarding. Your commitment to learning and growth is commendable, and I have no doubt the valuable insights gained today will have a profound impact on your future presentations. Before we wrap up further, I know a lot of you have been waiting for the amazing Amazon vouchers. So yeah, this is a giveaway alert. You can take a screenshot if you wish to. Let me just tell you how would it work. All you need to do is go on Google, type edForce, right? On the right hand side at the GMB Google My Business portion, you will have a section for review. Write a review, take a screenshot, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and email it to me. Your voucher with 1,000 rupees Amazon gift card voucher will be in your email within 7 working days, 7 to 10 working days. In closing, let's carry forward the lesson learned today and continue to elevate our presentation skills one slide at a time. Thank you once again, Mohit, and all our lovely participants for making this EdTalk a great success.
Thank you, Ashutosh. All of you have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
So Ashutosh, Seema's asked a question. I'll just quickly type in the 3 sites once again. Actually, do them together.